Respire Espace Pleural is an exploratory research project on the theme of respiration, lung physiology, its relationship to plants, and the air we breathe. A movement that is so simple yet connected to nature and my body, suggested by the fibrous materials and the blurred sensory aspect achieved by the gelling of plants in the bioplastic and the reflection of films on the artworks, sometimes paired, sometimes coming into direct contact with them. The images merge with the membranes created by the gelatin and the glycerin. Themselves a kind of illuminated membrane, the images of the short films serve as a mirror and a portal to emotions of loss, grief, echo anxiety, but also gentleness. Nature being an integral part of this fleeting and ephemeral work, these pieces will leave little trace once they disintegrate and return to nature. Photographs of my family are scattered throughout the work as both my parents succumbed to respiratory problems. The respiratory organ is enveloped by a thin membrane called pleural space. I chose this term because it has two meanings, to cry and plural, referring to the lungs and respiration. In English, this membrane is called the pleura. It is actually composed of two membranes, one that is insensitive or it's not covered with nerves. It's called the visceral membrane, and the other that is covered in nerves, and it's called the parietal membrane. And the pleura is in between those two. It's a space between those two membranes that is made of water, a liquid, and it allows for the proper movement of the lungs inside the thoracic cavity. This work is conceptual. It incorporates two forms, natural forms and handcrafted forms. I worked with these two forces throughout the piece, allowing as much natural as possible to the forms and the processes. This exploration evokes empathy for my parents, both of whom I lost to respiratory illnesses. Walking in the forest, I breathe in the air that the trees have created, and I become part of them at the same time. I invite them into my body. Last February, I listened to the words of Bhikkhu Panyakara, a Buddhist monk. He talked about the importance of breathing deeply and intentionally and saying the words, "Today will be my peaceful day." During the COVID-19 pandemic, I was so scared. I had never experienced that level of fear. Breathing became so important to me. I was thankful for each breath. The installation in Service to Women, au service des femmes, explores my personal family history, my relationship with my mother, and my grief over her loss. I spent one last night in her bed, staring at a nail on the wall that I had hammered in a few months earlier to hang a piece my mother liked. The last night resulted in these works on recycled bed sheets, embroidered, screen printed, and printed with cabbage ink, and also I used Solar Fast, a kind of solar ink. The film In Service to Women is connected to my mother's life. She worked for the professional development of single mothers. The photograph of her and her sisters is a mirror to my sisters and me, her 4 daughters. Family cycles repeated in each generation. There was probably a Noëlla Guimond in the 1600s, the 1700s, and 1800s, a woman who was different and who forged ahead, fighting for others with compassion. The installation river, or fleuve, is a kind of funeral for my mother. A rectangle containing water from the St. Lawrence River and the St. Mary's River sits at the center of the last image of her apartment, where I left the last space that still connected me to her while she was alive. Leaving that last apartment and scattering her ashes on the St. Lawrence River were the last acts I performed that were still connected to her physical being. The installation, the cup, la tasse, refers to the theme of sleeping while the world burns. These elements are yet another reflection on my mother, on bioplastic, the respiratory membrane placed against a background of fiber, the plant fiber that allows us to breathe. These cycles of life and death are intertwined, inescapable. I engraved an image of myself sleeping in my mother's bed the last night when I said goodbye to her forever, a month after her death. My face appears asleep. The last traces of her apartment are still present and somewhat accusatory. You should have come by more often. The installation Night Fire, this work brings together bioplastic and plant fiber paper on wood panels, as well as a film featuring images of California, the Palisade fires, and images of Lake Superior. Its purpose is to emphasize the need to be mindful of climate change and to work diligently to adopt more environmentally friendly practices. For without the earth, we have nothing. Without water and air, we cannot live. The idea of sleeping while the world burns is present once again in this work. 2 catastrophic events, the loss of my mother and the California fires, intertwine and are juxtaposed, creating a sense of gentleness, but also one that contains attention through the details we notice, the images of the fire, the black ink, and the words bathed in stars, signifying the end of life, baigné d'étoiles. The mural recomposed uprootings assembles natural and manufactured objects. Alpaca fiber spun with Mireille Gagnon mousse is crocheted onto a pressed leaf of wild vine that grows in the back garden in my yard. This assemblage is added to about 10 other elements, handmade paper cutouts from aluminum of soda cans, small photocopied works of me as a little girl, dried tomato roots and plants picked before the frost and kept to be assembled on the wall later in this mural, tell a kind of timeline of a person's life. Cap Rouge is the story of my youth. Bioplastic dried on a Rubbermaid lid, creating an oval cavity in the center, perfect for a sort of natural frame, and it's glued onto a paper that is plant green in color. I wrote down memories of my youth about Cap Rouge in pencil, in English, so the viewer could understand. Here is the text. My life as a child was spent in and around our blue house in Cap Rouge, Quebec, Canada, imagining and playing under the galerie, the back deck that my father built. It was spent planting plants and seeds with my mother, walking in the fields in front of my house where we would disappear making paths and pretend houses in the tall grass, building tunnels and sliding down hills in the winter. The spring brought amazing puddles that I thought were great big lakes in which I walked with my rubber boots, drowning my Barbies in those ponds. I cried upon finding dead birds and gave them funerals. I fell off the tremble tree behind my house and felt my breath completely cut, le souffle coupé. I climbed ladders that my dad left when he would work on the roof, and I chased butterflies completely oblivious of the danger. This rural setting shaped me. I could hear les carillons des cloches de l'église du village. It gave me a taste for creating experiences with physical objects and moving images and projections. It reminds me to breathe with nature and allow its beauty and goodness to enter my body, allowed by the thin pleural membrane in my lungs with cellular regeneration, being a part of each other through our breathing processes. Today, in my 50s, when I make a bioplastic or a paper with plants from my backyard, it's always to this Cap Rouge setting that I return, to my parents and my 3 sisters and my own little family, all into one time in space through this work. Breathing helps you refocus. La respiration aide à se recentrer is an exploration of blood. Bioplastic was poured into plates to bring back the domestic aspect of my work. In fact, embroidery, gelatin processing, paper making, gardening, flower pressing, and spinning, all these forms of domestic activity have often been associated with the character of the old woman that I am becoming. I rewrote excerpts that my mother had written in notebooks, excerpts that I wouldn't necessarily that excerpts that wouldn't necessarily be identifiable, somewhat removed from their original context. I wrote these excerpts on notes from a notebook that my mother had, and when she passed away, my sister gave me all of these notepads and notebooks. I left the bioplastic dry with these notes inside and with plants surrounding them. I chose a blood red, which translates very well. I created the film to accompany them, a film that refers to the work itself and creates a unified composition. I filmed the red circles and projected those scenes of themselves onto the 4 circles, arranged in 4 blood cells in a horizontal line. The La Mère et la Fille, the mother and the daughter, is an exploration of lungs represented by 2 bioplastic forms on wooden panels. Photographs of my mother and me are superimposed on the film, projected onto the 2 panels, which act like parentheses on either side of the projection. The film is becoming increasingly harmonious with the artworks. The filmmaking and the physical object creation process is improving and taking on more and more meaning. I hope to continue in this direction. The exploration has led to significant creative process. And with that, I would like to thank the Ontario Arts Council and the Government of Ontario for its precious support, and also thank my family, David Broadbeck, Jonathan Broadbeck, and Madeline Broadbeck. I love you. And if you've watched till the end, thank you so much for watching. Bye.